Before you get comfortable, answer this. Can a weapon designed to take lives actually save lives? Tonight we're exploring the mind of Richard Gatling, a doctor who witnessed the Civil War's toll and came to a startling conclusion. He believed that if he could multiply one soldier's firepower by 100, armies could shrink dramatically. Fewer soldiers meant less disease, less exposure, fewer deaths. Gatling later wrote in 1877 that a machine gun could enable one man to do the work of 100 and reduce exposure to disease. It was humanitarian thinking applied to mechanical engineering, and it produced a machine that would change warfare. We'll follow how a farmer's seed drill inspired a rotating gun, why the US Army hesitated, and how the same idea still hums in aircraft today. But first, we need to understand the man behind the paradox. Richard Jordan Gatling carried both the promise of healing and the shadow of near-death with him everywhere he went. You've just earned your medical degree, ready to heal the world, when smallpox nearly kills you. You survive, but the experience changes everything about how you see human suffering and death. Gatling grew up in a family where invention wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. His father ran a plantation in North Carolina, but the real action happened in the workshop. Young Richard spent his childhood surrounded by mechanical work, watching his father tinker with farming equipment and steamboat propellers. The smell of machine oil and hot metal became as familiar as breakfast. His hands learned to shape iron before they learned to write prescriptions. By the time he reached adulthood, Gatling had already proven himself as an inventor. He understood how mechanical systems worked, how gears meshed and springs compressed. He could look at a problem and see the moving parts needed to solve it. But his family pushed him toward respectability, toward medicine, toward a profession that would make him a gentleman rather than just another mechanic with dirty fingernails. But a brush with death from smallpox changed everything. The disease hit him like a freight train, leaving him bedridden and fighting for his life. The fever, the scars, the long recovery. You can imagine how that changes what you care about. Many patients went blind. Many died. Gatling lived, but barely. He earned his medical degree in 1850 from Ohio Medical College, but never practiced medicine professionally. The irony cuts deep. The man who survived a disease that killed millions refused to use his medical training to heal individual patients. Instead, that near-death experience became his teacher in ways no medical school could match. The disease that almost claimed him showed him how illness could devastate more efficiently than any battlefield commander. Think about what Gatling witnessed during his recovery. Hospital wards packed with smallpox victims, bodies stacked like cordwood outside medical facilities. The disease spread through crowded conditions like fire through dry timber. One infected person could contaminate dozens, then hundreds. Gatling watched an invisible enemy accomplish what entire armies struggled to achieve: mass casualties with mechanical precision. His medical training gave him a unique perspective on human suffering that most inventors never possessed. While other mechanical minds focused on efficiency and profit, Gatling understood anatomy and physiology. He knew how the human body worked, where it was vulnerable, how it broke down under stress. More importantly, he understood how disease spread through crowded conditions like army camps and city slums. This wasn't just academic knowledge from textbooks and lectures. Gatling had felt death's grip personally. He knew the sensation of his body failing, of systems shutting down one by one. That intimate knowledge of mortality shaped every invention that followed. Where other inventors saw mechanical challenges, Gatling saw human consequences. The medical education also taught him about numbers, about mortality rates and statistical analysis. Doctors in the 1850s were beginning to understand disease patterns, to track how illnesses moved through populations. Gatling absorbed these lessons and applied them beyond medicine. He started thinking about warfare the way a doctor thinks about an epidemic. How do you reduce overall casualties while achieving your objective? During his medical studies, Gatling observed military hospitals during the Mexican-American War. The wounded soldiers he saw weren't just casualties of combat. They were victims of camp diseases, of poor sanitation, of infections that spread through crowded military quarters. For every soldier killed by enemy fire, several more died from diseases that thrived in military conditions. The math was brutal and clear. That near-fatal encounter with smallpox planted a seed that would grow into an obsession with preventing mass casualties. Gatling became convinced that the key to reducing human suffering lay not in healing individuals one at a time, but in preventing the conditions that created mass death in the first place. He started thinking like an engineer about problems that doctors treated as inevitable. The transition from healer to inventor wasn't sudden or dramatic. Gatling continued working on agricultural machinery, improving seed drills and farming equipment. But the Civil War was approaching, and with it the promise of casualties that would dwarf anything America had seen before. Gatling watched the political situation deteriorate and saw an opportunity that others missed. You have to understand the timing here. While politicians argued about slavery and states' rights, while generals planned massive troop movements, Gatling was calculating a different kind of mathematics. He was thinking about how mechanical innovation could solve the fundamental problem of warfare, how to achieve military objectives while minimizing human casualties. The workshop where he'd learned to shape metal as a child became his laboratory for reimagining combat. The medical knowledge that should have made him a healer instead made him a revolutionary inventor. The disease that nearly killed him had taught him that the greatest enemies weren't always the ones you could see on a battlefield. Gatling's unique combination of mechanical skill and medical knowledge created a perfect storm of innovation. He understood human vulnerability from personal experience, mechanical systems from childhood training, and statistical analysis from medical education. This convergence of knowledge would soon produce something the world had never seen. A weapon designed not just to kill efficiently, but to reduce overall human suffering through superior lethality. The young man who survived smallpox had learned that sometimes the most effective way to save lives was to threaten them more convincingly. But the breakthrough that would make this possible wouldn't come from his medical training or his childhood in the workshop. It would come from an entirely different source, one that had been feeding America for decades. The answer lay in America's grain fields. What if the key to rapid-fire killing came from planting seeds? Before Gatling ever thought about guns, he revolutionized Midwest farming with his seed-sowing machinery. Picture a typical spring morning in the 1840s. Farmers scattered seeds by hand, walking their fields in endless rows, hoping for even distribution. It was back-breaking work that took weeks to complete. One bad season could mean starvation. Gatling looked at this problem and saw mechanical opportunity. His wheat drills and planters used rotating mechanisms to distribute seeds evenly and efficiently. A rotating drum picked up seeds from a hopper, carried them through measured channels, then dropped them into furrows at precise intervals. The timing was everything. The sound of these machines working was almost musical. Metal drums turned against metal housing, creating a steady rhythm punctuated by the whisper of seeds falling into earth. Farmers who used Gatling's equipment could plant entire fields in days rather than weeks. The rotating principle solved the core challenge of agriculture: how to distribute individual items rapidly and evenly across large areas. But as Civil War casualties mounted, Gatling saw a darker application for his agricultural genius. The headlines from battlefields painted a picture of unprecedented carnage. Traditional warfare meant massive armies clashing with single-shot muskets and bayonets. Thousands of men would march toward each other, fire one volley, then engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The casualty reports read like natural disasters. Gatling studied these battle descriptions with the eye of an engineer. The same rotating principle that planted crops could plant bullets in enemies. Think about the mechanical challenge. Both systems needed to feed individual items through multiple channels at controlled intervals. Whether you were distributing seeds or projectiles, the engineering problems were identical. He based the gun's feed and rotating idea on his earlier seed-sowing machines. The hopper held raw material. The rotating mechanism selected and positioned each item. Gravity helped move things along, and sequential timing ensured even distribution. You could replace seeds with bullets and soil with battlefield, and the basic mechanical requirements remained unchanged. The mechanical DNA was identical in every way that mattered. Rotation provided the primary motion, moving each chamber through a cycle of loading, positioning, and release. Gravity feed eliminated the need for complex pushing mechanisms. Sequential timing meant each chamber operated independently, so if one jammed, the others kept working. It was agricultural engineering applied to military problems. Gatling spent hours in his workshop, staring at his seed drills and imagining deadlier applications. The rotating drum that once distributed wheat could hold gun barrels instead. The hoppers that held grain could hold ammunition. The timing mechanisms that prevented seed clumping could prevent barrel overheating. Every component had a military equivalent. The transition from agriculture to warfare required surprisingly few modifications. Gun barrels replaced seed tubes, but they still needed to rotate in sequence. Bullets replaced seeds, but they still needed gravity feed and precise timing. The firing mechanism was new, but it operated on the same rotational principle that had made his planters so effective. Where farmers saw life-giving potential, Gatling now saw life-saving destruction. This wasn't contradictory thinking. It was consistent engineering applied to different problems. Agriculture and warfare both required efficient distribution of materials across space. The moral implications were secondary to the mechanical requirements. Gatling's workshop became a laboratory for converting peaceful technology into military hardware. The smell of gun oil replaced machine oil, but the sounds remained similar. Metal rotating against metal, the precise clicking of mechanical timing, the whisper of items moving through channels. His neighbors probably noticed the change in materials being delivered, but the fundamental work looked the same. The engineering challenges were more complex than simple conversion. Gun barrels generated heat that could warp metal and jam mechanisms. Bullets were heavier than seeds and required different feed angles. The firing sequence needed split-second timing that agricultural machinery never demanded. Each problem required careful redesign while maintaining the basic rotating principle. But Gatling's agricultural background gave him advantages that pure weapons designers lacked. He understood how to make machinery work reliably in harsh conditions. Farm equipment needed to function in dust, mud, heat, and cold. It had to be simple enough for operators with minimal training. These same requirements applied to battlefield weapons. The prototype development process followed agricultural patterns: build, test, modify, rebuild. Gatling tested his early models the way farmers tested new planters, relentlessly, under various conditions, looking for failure points. Each breakdown taught him something about the interaction between rotation, timing, and materials handling. A working prototype existed around 1861, and by November 1862, Gatling had obtained a US patent for his design. The early models could fire roughly 200 rounds per minute, a staggering improvement over single-shot muskets. Traditional battles were producing thousands of casualties per day. If rapid-fire weapons could concentrate that same destructive power in fewer soldiers, armies could shrink while maintaining effectiveness. The irony was perfect. Tools of cultivation became instruments of war. The same mechanical principles that helped feed growing populations now promised to reduce those populations through more efficient killing. Gatling saw this as progress, as humanitarian engineering applied to military problems. His rotating mechanism would soon prove that agricultural innovation could revolutionize warfare just as effectively as it had revolutionized farming. The seeds of destruction had been planted in fields of grain, and now they were ready to harvest a very different kind of crop. The transformation was complete. The inventor who had helped farmers plant life was now helping soldiers plant death. But Gatling wasn't thinking about death at all. He was calculating something far more complex, something that would have shocked the generals planning their massive campaigns. Gatling's equation was deceptively simple. 1 man equals 100 soldiers equals thousands of lives saved. It sounds strange. How did more efficient killing promise fewer deaths? But Gatling saw the math clearly. While generals planned massive troop movements, he was calculating a different kind of warfare. Picture the typical military planning session of the early 1860s. Maps spread across wooden tables, officers pushing colored pins around terrain features, calculating how many regiments to move where. The math was always the same. More soldiers meant more firepower. More firepower meant better chances of victory. Gatling looked at these same calculations and saw waste on an industrial scale. His logic was brutally simple. If 1 soldier could do the work of 100, armies could shrink dramatically. Think about what that meant in practical terms. Instead of marching 50,000 men to a battlefield, you could achieve the same destructive capacity with 500. Instead of feeding, housing, and moving massive human formations, you could deploy compact units with concentrated firepower. But this wasn't about military efficiency. This was about humanitarian mathematics. Historians estimate that roughly 2/3 of Civil War deaths resulted from disease rather than battlefield wounds. Gatling's idea: if stronger firepower meant fewer soldiers in the field, there would be fewer men exposed to camp diseases and the large-scale suffering of long campaigns. His medical training had shown him how infections moved through populations, and what looked like military necessity to generals looked like epidemiological disaster to someone trained in medicine. Smaller armies meant fewer men exposed to battlefield diseases that killed more soldiers than bullets. Picture a typical Civil War encampment. Thousands of men packed into temporary shelters, sharing cooking facilities and waste disposal systems that couldn't handle the load. The smell alone told the story. Human waste, rotting food, unwashed bodies, and the sweet stench of infection created an atmosphere that bred disease faster than any enemy could kill soldiers. Gatling calculated that reducing army size by 90% would eliminate most of these disease vectors. 500 men could maintain proper sanitation where 50,000 could not. Small units could move quickly between clean water sources instead of contaminating rivers and wells. They could avoid the massive supply lines that created opportunities for disease transmission. The medical logic extended beyond simple sanitation. Fewer soldiers meant less time in unsanitary camps where cholera and dysentery thrived. Traditional armies spent months in fixed positions, turning temporary encampments into permanent health disasters. Soldiers lived in their own filth, drank contaminated water, and ate spoiled food because supply systems couldn't keep pace with demand. But rapid-fire weapons could change this entire dynamic. Small, mobile units equipped with concentrated firepower could strike quickly and move on. No need for massive supply trains that attracted disease along with enemy attention. No need for permanent camps that became breeding grounds for deadly infections. Hit hard, hit fast, then relocate to clean ground. In Gatling's mind, concentrated firepower would make wars shorter, cleaner, more decisive. This wasn't wishful thinking. It was strategic analysis based on historical patterns. Long wars created more casualties through disease and attrition than short, decisive conflicts. The Napoleonic Wars had demonstrated this principle repeatedly. Armies died more from camp diseases than battlefield wounds. Gatling extrapolated this pattern to American warfare. If rapid-fire weapons could end conflicts quickly, total casualties would drop dramatically. A brutal but brief engagement would produce fewer total deaths than a prolonged campaign of traditional battles. The mathematics seemed clear. Increase lethality to decrease mortality. Think about the psychological impact of his equation. Traditional warfare relied on human waves, on the assumption that enough men charging forward would eventually overwhelm any defense. This approach guaranteed massive casualties on both sides, but rapid-fire weapons could break enemy formations before they reached close combat range. Gatling genuinely believed that making killing more efficient would reduce overall deaths. The reasoning followed medical principles. Sometimes you had to use harsh treatments to prevent worse outcomes. A surgeon might amputate a limb to save a life. A rapid-fire weapon might kill efficiently to end conflicts quickly. This wasn't cold-blooded calculation. It was humanitarian engineering applied to military problems. Gatling saw his invention as a kind of medical intervention on the scale of entire wars. Just as vaccines prevented diseases by controlled exposure to pathogens, rapid-fire weapons could prevent prolonged conflicts by controlled application of overwhelming force. The doctor in him recognized patterns that pure military minds missed. Disease killed predictably and systematically. Large armies created perfect conditions for epidemic spread. Traditional warfare prolonged conflicts and maximized exposure to deadly conditions. Every variable pointed toward the same conclusion. Smaller, more lethal forces would save lives overall. This mathematical mercy became his driving obsession. Gatling wasn't trying to perfect killing for its own sake. He was trying to solve the fundamental problem of human conflict: how to achieve military objectives while minimizing total casualties. The answer lay in mechanical multiplication of individual firepower. His workshop became a laboratory for humanitarian lethality. Every gear, spring, and barrel existed to serve this greater purpose. The sounds of metal shaping and testing weren't just mechanical noise. They were the sounds of mathematical mercy being forged into physical form. The doctor in him had found a prescription for war itself. Take one rapid-fire weapon, apply to concentrated enemy forces, repeat until conflict resolution achieved. Minimum effective dose for maximum therapeutic effect. Gatling believed he was engineering peace through superior firepower. The mathematics seemed perfect on paper, but turning theory into reality would require solving a problem that had destroyed every previous attempt at rapid-fire weapons. The challenge wasn't just making bullets fly faster. It was keeping the gun from melting under its own success. Gatling's solution was as elegant as it was revolutionary. 6 barrels, 1 crank, and the future of warfare spinning into existence. His breakthrough wasn't just rapid fire. It was solving the heat problem that destroyed earlier attempts at mechanized killing. Picture the typical rapid-fire experiments of the 1850s. Inventors building single-barrel weapons that could fire multiple rounds in quick succession. These contraptions worked for maybe 30 seconds before the heat quickly warped single barrels beyond recognition. The physics were unforgiving. Each gunpowder explosion generated intense heat that single barrels absorbed with nowhere to dissipate the thermal energy. But rotating barrels shared the thermal load like relay runners passing a baton. While one barrel fired and absorbed heat, the other 5 cooled in the open air. By the time a barrel completed its rotation and fired again, it had time to dissipate most of the thermal buildup. Rotating barrels distributed heat and allowed sustained fire. Gatling's rotating mechanism worked like a revolver scaled up to industrial proportions. 6 rifle barrels mounted in a circle around a central axis, each barrel timed to fire at a different point in the rotation cycle. As you turn the hand crank, each barrel moved through the same sequence. Load cartridge, advance to firing position, discharge, extract spent casing, move to loading position again. The sound was unlike anything the world had heard before. Not a single crack, but a steady mechanical rattle that announced the weapon's presence from miles away. But the early versions were mechanical nightmares that would have frustrated a master clockmaker. Every component had to work in perfect harmony, and when one element failed, the entire system collapsed like a house of cards. The engineering was elegant in theory, but brutally complex in practice. Early production used paper cartridges that jammed constantly because they weren't designed for mechanical handling. Traditional soldiers loaded each cartridge by hand, taking care to position it correctly and ensure proper seating. Gatling's mechanism grabbed cartridges with metal claws, shoved them into chambers, and expected them to fire reliably. Paper tore, powder spilled, and chambers clogged with debris. Brass cartridges later improved reliability, but the early feeding problems plagued demonstrations. Gravity-fed ammunition failed under stress when the weapon tilted or shook. The ammunition hopper sat above the barrels, relying on gravity to drop cartridges into loading position. But battlefield conditions weren't controlled laboratory environments. Weapons bounced on rough terrain, operators shifted positions, and gravity alone couldn't guarantee reliable feeding. Cartridges stuck together, fell sideways, or missed their chambers entirely. Hand cranking required perfect timing that most operators couldn't master. Too slow, and the weapon lost its rapid-fire advantage. Too fast, and cartridges didn't have time to seat properly before firing. The crank had to maintain steady pressure and consistent speed while under combat stress. Operators needed the coordination of a trained musician and the strength of a blacksmith. Each barrel had to fire, extract, and reload in perfect sequence, or the entire system would bind. Think about the precision required. 6 barrels moving through 6 different stages of operation simultaneously. One barrel loading, while another fired, while a third extracted its spent casing. The timing windows measured in fractions of seconds, and missing one sequence could jam the entire mechanism. The weapon that was supposed to simplify warfare was mechanically complex beyond belief. Traditional muskets had maybe a dozen moving parts. Gatling's contraption had hundreds of components that all needed to function together. Springs, gears, extractors, firing pins, and timing mechanisms created a mechanical puzzle that challenged even experienced gunsmiths. Early demonstrations sometimes ended with spectacular mechanical failures that embarrassed Gatling in front of potential customers. Picture military officials gathering to witness the future of warfare, only to watch the weapon seize up after 20 rounds. Barrels overheated despite the rotation, cartridges jammed in extractors, and hand cranks bent under stress. These failures weren't minor inconveniences. They were complete operational breakdowns. But when everything worked correctly, something remarkable happened. The mechanical symphony achieved its intended tempo, and sustained rapid fire became reality. Gatling had created a weapon that could maintain continuous fire for minutes rather than seconds. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. When it worked, the Gatling gun achieved something unprecedented in the history of warfare: sustained rapid fire without catastrophic overheating. The rotating principle distributed thermal stress so effectively that properly maintained weapons could fire hundreds of rounds without mechanical failure. This wasn't just an improvement over existing weapons. It was a fundamental breakthrough in military technology. The weapon transformed battlefield dynamics in ways that traditional military thinking couldn't accommodate. Small units equipped with Gatling guns could hold positions against much larger conventional forces. The concentrated firepower disrupted enemy formations before they could close to effective range. Traditional cavalry charges became suicide missions against mechanized fire. Gatling's rotating barrels solved more than just the heat problem. The mechanism provided natural rhythm for sustained fire, prevented ammunition waste through controlled discharge rates, and created redundancy that kept weapons operational even when individual barrels failed. These advantages would influence military design for generations. The rotating principle would echo through military technology for the next century and beyond. Modern aircraft cannons still use Gatling's basic concept of multiple rotating barrels sharing thermal load. Electric drives replaced hand cranks, but the fundamental engineering remains unchanged. What started as agricultural machinery adapted for warfare became the foundation for modern rapid-fire weapons. Gatling had proven that mechanical innovation could revolutionize combat just as effectively as it had revolutionized agriculture. The same rotating principles that planted seeds now planted bullets with devastating efficiency. The doctor who wanted to save lives through superior firepower had created a weapon that worked exactly as designed. Now he just needed someone to buy it. The military bureaucracy had other ideas entirely. Brigadier General James W. Ripley, the Army's Chief of Ordnance, looked at Gatling's invention and saw problems, not solutions. Picture the typical military procurement meeting of the 1860s. Officers in blue uniforms sitting around polished tables, examining weapons submissions with the enthusiasm of tax auditors reviewing expense reports. They handled Gatling's prototype like it might explode in their hands, which wasn't entirely unreasonable given its mechanical complexity. The Army's objections were practical and immediate. The weapon was too heavy for infantry mobility. Early models jammed constantly due to feed problems. Specialized ammunition created logistics nightmares. Institutional conservatism resisted unproven technology. Each concern represented a legitimate barrier to military adoption, not mere bureaucratic stubbornness. Traditional infantry weapons weighed maybe 10 pounds and could be carried by individual soldiers. Gatling's contraption weighed hundreds of pounds and needed a crew to operate effectively. You couldn't march it across rough terrain like a standard rifle. It required wheels, horses, and dedicated transportation that slowed down entire units. The ammunition requirements created headaches for supply officers who were already struggling to keep conventional forces equipped. Standard military rifles used paper cartridges that soldiers could load individually. Gatling's weapon demanded precisely manufactured metallic cartridges fed through mechanical systems that jammed if the ammunition wasn't perfect. Every round had to meet exact specifications for length, diameter, and powder charge, or the entire mechanism would bind up like a broken clock. But the resistance ran deeper than practical concerns. The Army had spent decades perfecting tactics based on single-shot weapons and formation fighting. Officers studied classical military theory that emphasized discipline, coordinated volleys, and the moral superiority of soldiers who could reload under fire. Rapid-fire weapons challenged everything they'd learned about warfare. Think about the psychological investment these men had in conventional warfare. They'd built their careers mastering traditional tactics, earned their promotions by understanding how infantry squares countered cavalry charges, how artillery supported advancing troops, how disciplined volleys could break enemy formations. Gatling's invention threatened to make their expertise obsolete overnight. Military procurement officers approached new technology with conservative caution born from experience. They'd seen too many inventors promising revolutionary weapons that failed spectacularly during actual combat. Every military archive contained reports of experimental firearms that exploded, jammed, or broke down when soldiers needed them most. Gatling's contraption looked like another inventor's pipe dream wrapped in mechanical complexity. The Army preferred proven, reliable single-shot rifles over experimental mechanical contraptions that might fail at critical moments. Standard military thinking valued reliability over innovation, simplicity over complexity. A rifle that fired one shot reliably was worth more than a machine that fired hundreds of shots unreliably. Soldiers could fix broken rifles with basic tools, but Gatling's mechanism required specialized knowledge and replacement parts that might not exist on remote battlefields. Consider the maintenance nightmare from a logistics perspective. Traditional rifles needed cleaning and occasional part replacement, but any competent soldier could perform basic maintenance. Gatling's weapon required understanding of complex timing mechanisms, spring tensions, and feed systems. If something broke during combat, you needed a skilled mechanic, not just a soldier with a cleaning kit. Military culture also resisted weapons that reduced the importance of individual soldier skills. Traditional warfare rewarded marksmanship, reload speed, and battlefield discipline developed through years of training. Rapid-fire weapons threatened to make ordinary soldiers as effective as veteran marksmen, which undermined the entire military hierarchy based on skill differentiation. Gatling's humanitarian arguments fell on deaf ears because generals wanted battlefield effectiveness, not casualty reduction. Military leaders measured success in territory captured and enemy forces defeated, not in friendly casualties avoided. The idea that weapons should minimize overall deaths struck professional soldiers as naive civilian thinking that ignored military realities. Picture a typical meeting between Gatling and military procurement officers. He'd explain his humanitarian mathematics while they calculated practical battlefield requirements. He talked about reducing army sizes and preventing disease, while they worried about maintaining unit cohesion and battlefield control. His medical perspective clashed with their military priorities, like oil mixing with water. The timing couldn't have been worse for innovative military technology. The Civil War was already underway, using conventional weapons and conventional tactics that both sides understood. Military leaders weren't looking for revolutionary changes that might disrupt established supply chains and training programs. They needed proven weapons they could deploy immediately, not experimental devices that required new tactical doctrines. Despite official resistance, a few forward-thinking commanders saw potential in Gatling's invention. General Benjamin F. Butler bought a dozen guns with his own money and used them in limited actions around Petersburg. Admiral David D. Porter purchased a single mount for naval operations. These personal purchases provided real-world testing data that official procurement channels couldn't deliver. Meanwhile, the Civil War raged on with conventional weapons and conventional casualty rates that validated everything Gatling had predicted about traditional warfare. Massive armies clashed with single-shot rifles and bayonets, producing casualties that disease amplified beyond imagination. Camp illnesses killed more soldiers than battlefield wounds, exactly as Gatling's medical training had suggested they would. The bureaucratic resistance extended beyond technical concerns to fundamental questions about military identity. Professional soldiers saw themselves as warrior scholars who combined physical courage with tactical expertise. Mechanical weapons threatened to reduce warfare to industrial production, where success depended more on manufacturing capacity than military skill. Army procurement officers also worried about dependency on civilian manufacturers and complex supply chains. Traditional weapons could be produced by military arsenals using established techniques. Gatling's invention required precision manufacturing that only specialized civilian contractors could provide, creating potential vulnerabilities in wartime production. It took until 1866, after the war ended, for the U.S. Army to officially adopt the Gatling gun. By then, the massive casualties that might have validated Gatling's humanitarian theory had already occurred using conventional weapons. The very conflict that could have proven his mathematical mercy had ended through traditional means. The American military establishment had spoken with characteristic caution and institutional conservatism, but beyond America's borders, other military minds were reaching very different conclusions about Gatling's mechanical revolution. Russian, British, and Ottoman forces saw potential where American generals saw problems. Picture the difference in procurement meetings. While U.S. Army officers debated mechanical reliability and tactical doctrine, foreign military representatives pulled out checkbooks and asked about delivery schedules. They weren't burdened by American military tradition or the peculiar politics of a nation fighting itself. Russia bought large numbers of Gatling guns, with purchases eventually reaching into the hundreds. The British deployed them in the Anglo-Zulu and Anglo-Egyptian campaigns. Ottoman forces acquired thousands through foreign distributors, while several South American nations placed their own orders. While the US hesitated, foreign powers ordered Gatlings, funded further development, and gained field experience that improved the weapon's reliability. International buyers weren't constrained by US military bureaucracy or civil war politics that made everything controversial. European powers had been watching American military innovations with a detached interest of shoppers browsing a catalog. They didn't care whether Gatling's weapon fit existing tactical manuals or threatened traditional military hierarchies. They cared whether it worked and whether they could get it before their enemies did. The purchasing process moved with the efficiency of international arms dealing. Foreign representatives visited Gatling's facility, witnessed demonstrations, negotiated prices, and arranged shipping without the endless committee reviews that paralyzed American procurement. Military attaches from various embassies became regular visitors to Gatling's workshop, bringing interpreters and technical experts who understood mechanical systems better than bureaucratic procedures. Think about the appeal from their perspective. European militaries were engaged in constant colonial expansion, territorial disputes, and imperial competition that demanded technological advantages. A weapon that could multiply individual firepower offered strategic benefits that outweighed mechanical complexity. They weren't fighting civil wars with divided loyalties. They were projecting power across vast distances where every advantage mattered. Foreign deployments tested and broadened the weapons uses, including colonial and conventional wars. The clinical mathematics Gatling had calculated in his workshop would meet the messy realities of imperial warfare, territorial expansion, and colonial suppression. His weapon was about to face trial by fire in conflicts that bore little resemblance to the American Civil War scenarios he'd envisioned. The British used Gatlings in colonial campaigns across Africa and Asia, deploying them in contexts that challenged every assumption about humanitarian warfare. British forces carried these weapons into territories where traditional armies faced spear-wielding opponents, where technological superiority created massive imbalances rather than efficient conflict resolution. The rotating barrels that Gatling designed to prevent overheating instead enabled sustained fire against formations that couldn't return effective fire. Russians deployed their units for territorial expansion and border conflicts, finding applications that Gatling had never considered during his workshop calculations. Russian military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower applied rapidly across contested frontiers. They mounted Gatling guns on railway cars, creating mobile fire platforms that could suppress opposition along entire railway lines. The weapons became tools of territorial control rather than casualty reduction. Russian deployments revealed new tactical possibilities that went beyond Gatling's original conception. Small units equipped with rapid-fire weapons could hold strategic positions that would normally require battalion-strength forces. Mountain passes, river crossings, and frontier outposts became controllable by crews that traditional military thinking would consider insufficient. The humanitarian mathematics worked, but in ways that concentrated rather than distributed military power. Ottoman forces purchased thousands through foreign distributors and licensing agreements that bypassed American export restrictions. Ottoman procurement officers weren't interested in humanitarian theory. They needed weapons that could maintain imperial control over vast territories populated by restive subjects. Gatling guns offered solutions to internal security problems that conventional weapons couldn't address effectively. The Ottoman deployment pattern showed how rapid-fire weapons could serve police functions as well as military ones. Urban unrest, provincial rebellions, and border incursions all became manageable with concentrated firepower that didn't require massive troop deployments. The weapons enabled imperial control with smaller garrison forces, exactly as Gatling had predicted, but the context was suppression rather than humanitarian conflict resolution. Each deployment provided real-world data about the weapon's effectiveness and limitations under conditions Gatling had never tested. Field reports flowed back to manufacturers and military observers, documenting mechanical failures, tactical successes, and unexpected applications. The weapon worked reliably in desert conditions, mountain warfare, and tropical climates, but each environment revealed new maintenance requirements and operational challenges. International operators discovered modifications that improved battlefield effectiveness. Different ammunition types, mounting systems, and crew training techniques emerged from practical experience rather than theoretical design. The weapon evolved through use, becoming more lethal and reliable as military forces adapted it to specific tactical requirements. Foreign military success created demand that American hesitation had suppressed. International orders funded continued development and production improvements that made the weapon more attractive to eventual American adoption. The irony was perfect. Foreign confidence in American innovation exceeded American confidence in itself. The global marketplace for military technology operated according to different rules than domestic procurement. International buyers evaluated weapons based on battlefield effectiveness rather than bureaucratic compatibility. They wanted tools that worked, not tools that fit existing organizational structures. International success vindicated Gatling's engineering while complicating his humanitarian claims. The mechanical principles he developed worked flawlessly across different climates, terrains, and tactical situations. The rotating barrels shared thermal loads effectively, the ammunition feed systems operated reliably, and the overall weapon system proved adaptable to various military requirements. But the humanitarian mathematics that had driven his invention became increasingly problematic as deployment data accumulated. The weapon worked exactly as designed, producing concentrated firepower that enabled smaller military units to achieve strategic objectives. However, the contexts where foreign militaries deployed these weapons rarely matched Gatling's assumptions about balanced forces engaging in conventional warfare. The gun worked exactly as designed, but the results weren't always what Gatling had envisioned when he calculated his equations of mercy. His invention was about to face its most revealing test in conflicts where technological advantages would create outcomes that challenged every assumption about humanitarian warfare. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 and the Spanish-American War would provide the clearest evidence of what Gatling's invention could accomplish in the field. Colonial warfare offered ideal conditions for testing rapid-fire weapons against conventional forces in ways that European battlefields never could. Picture the typical colonial engagement. Professional armies with standardized equipment and industrial logistics facing indigenous forces using traditional weapons and tribal tactics. The technological gap wasn't subtle. It was a chasm that Gatling guns could exploit with devastating efficiency. These conflicts became proving grounds where military theorists could observe rapid-fire weapons under actual combat conditions. The laboratory wasn't a controlled testing facility, but vast territories where imperial powers projected force against populations that couldn't match their industrial capacity. Every engagement provided data about mechanical reliability, tactical effectiveness, and strategic applications that peacetime demonstrations couldn't replicate. Colonial commanders approached these conflicts with the confidence of engineers testing new machinery rather than soldiers engaging equal opponents. They knew their forces possessed overwhelming technological advantages that made traditional military caution unnecessary. The question wasn't whether they could win, but how efficiently they could achieve control while minimizing their own casualties and logistical burdens. But these conflicts revealed the dark side of Gatling's humanitarian equation in ways that challenged his mathematical assumptions about warfare. The doctor, who had calculated reduced casualties based on equal forces engaging in conventional battles, hadn't considered what happened when technological superiority created absolute tactical dominance. Against technologically inferior opponents, the Gatling gun created massive casualty imbalances that bore no resemblance to the balanced warfare Gatling had envisioned. Traditional military mathematics assumed both sides possessed roughly equivalent weapons and tactical capabilities. Colonial warfare demolished this assumption completely, creating engagements where the results showed devastating effects against poorly equipped opponents. In the Anglo-Zulu War, British forces deployed Gatling guns that proved devastatingly effective against Zulu formations armed with traditional weapons. Indigenous forces faced mechanized firepower they couldn't match, couldn't counter, and often couldn't comprehend until it was too late. Spears, shields, and assegais proved utterly inadequate against sustained rapid fire delivered by crews protected behind prepared positions. During the Spanish-American War, Lieutenant John H. Parker's Gatling gun detachment provided crucial support at San Juan Hill in 1898. The weapons demonstrated their tactical value in conventional warfare, but even here the technological advantage created outcomes that moved beyond Gatling's original humanitarian vision. Think about the psychological impact on forces experiencing rapid-fire weapons for the first time. The sound alone disrupted traditional battle tactics that depended on coordinated movement and leadership communication. The continuous metallic roar drowned out officers' commands, broke unit cohesion, and created panic among warriors trained for individual combat rather than mechanical slaughter. Colonial use exposed the humanitarian paradox at the heart of Gatling's invention. His device reduced imperial casualties and enabled territorial control with smaller forces, but this efficiency often meant large gaps in losses between opposing sides. The mathematics of mercy worked exactly as calculated, but only for the technologically superior force. Colonial engagements became case studies in how superior firepower could control vast territories with minimal losses among technologically advanced forces. Small detachments equipped with Gatling guns could hold strategic positions that would normally require battalion-strength forces. River crossings, mountain passes, and supply depots became controllable by crews that traditional military doctrine would consider inadequate. Military observers documented tactical innovations that emerged from these asymmetric conflicts. Gatling guns mounted on naval vessels could suppress coastal positions while protecting landing forces. Railway-mounted weapons could secure transportation corridors against guerrilla attacks. Fixed installations could control urban areas during periods of civil unrest. Each application moved further from Gatling's original vision of humanitarian warfare. Colonial commanders discovered that Gatling guns could control territory with minimal European losses while maximizing the psychological impact on indigenous populations. The weapons became tools of intimidation as much as destruction, demonstrating imperial power in ways that conventional weapons couldn't match. The message was clear. Resistance was not just futile but suicidal. The tactical lessons learned in colonial conflicts influenced military doctrine for decades afterward. Rapid-fire weapons proved most effective when deployed against opponents who lacked equivalent technology, adequate cover, or tactical knowledge of mechanized warfare. These weren't the balanced engagements that Gatling had used for his humanitarian calculations. Field reports from colonial deployments provided detailed data about weapon performance under various conditions. Desert heat, tropical humidity, mountain altitudes, and jungle environments all tested the mechanical systems in ways that workshop demonstrations never could. The weapons proved remarkably adaptable, But each environment revealed maintenance requirements and operational limitations that affected tactical planning. The economic efficiency of colonial warfare using rapid-fire weapons appealed to imperial administrators who measured success in cost per square mile of territory controlled. Gatling guns reduced the manpower requirements for maintaining colonial control, which translated into lower administrative costs and reduced political pressure from casualty reports reaching home populations. But the moral implications of this efficiency troubled observers who witnessed the weapons in action. Military professionals trained in European warfare concepts struggled to reconcile their understanding of honorable combat with the mechanical slaughter that characterized colonial engagements. The weapons worked exactly as designed, but the context transformed humanitarian tools into instruments of oppression. Colonial warfare revealed applications that Gatling had never considered during his workshop calculations. Urban crowd control, prison suppression, and border enforcement all became possible with concentrated firepower that didn't require massive troop deployments. The weapons enabled imperial control with smaller garrison forces, but the humanitarian benefits accrued only to the technologically superior side. These deployments proved the weapon's effectiveness while complicating its humanitarian justification. The mechanical principles worked flawlessly, the tactical applications succeeded brilliantly, and the strategic objectives were achieved efficiently. But the results bore no resemblance to the reduced casualties and shorter conflicts that Gatling had promised. The rotating barrels that shared thermal loads, the gravity-fed ammunition systems that maintained continuous fire, and the hand-crank mechanisms that provided controlled rates of fire all functioned exactly as engineered. The problem wasn't mechanical failure, but moral complexity that exceeded the inventor's humanitarian intentions. Gatling's invention had become a tool of imperial expansion rather than casualty reduction. The mathematics of mercy had transformed into the mathematics of dominance, proving that good intentions couldn't control how effective weapons would be used once they left the inventor's workshop. But the weapon itself continued evolving. Each deployment revealed mechanical problems that demanded solutions, tactical limitations that required improvements, and operational challenges that pushed the design beyond its original specifications. Field reports became Gatling's textbook for understanding what worked and what failed under fire. Every jam, every misfire, every mechanical failure taught him something new about rapid-fire warfare. Throughout the 1860s and 1870s, Gatling continuously refined his design based on field reports that arrived like medical case studies from around the world. Picture his workshop receiving detailed accounts from British colonial officers, Russian frontier commanders, and Ottoman garrison leaders. Each report described mechanical breakdowns, ammunition failures, and operational challenges that laboratory testing had never revealed. The feedback loop worked like diagnostic medicine applied to mechanical systems. Field operators documented every malfunction with the precision of surgeons describing surgical complications. Each problem required engineering solutions that Gatling developed through trial and error. 3 key improvements transformed the weapon's reliability. The Broadwell drum and similar feed improvements reduced jamming by organizing cartridges in predictable sequences rather than relying on gravity alone. Adoption of metallic brass cartridges improved reliability by eliminating the paper debris that constantly clogged early mechanisms. Gatling's 1893 patent for an electric motor-driven version achieved rates that electric-driven experiments reached up to 3,000 rounds per minute in testing. Paper cartridges jammed constantly. Metallic cartridges solved many feed problems. Better feeds increased sustained rate but added weight. The original hopper design worked during controlled demonstrations, but battlefield conditions revealed fundamental flaws. Magazine systems provided more controlled ammunition flow, but required precise manufacturing tolerances that increased production costs. Drum mechanisms enabled continuous fire for minutes rather than seconds, but the increased capacity came with weight penalties that affected mobility. Each improvement revealed new challenges that kept Gatling's engineers busy for decades. Mechanical systems that worked perfectly in isolation failed when integrated with other components. The extraction mechanism that handled paper cartridges couldn't grip metallic ones properly. Higher rates of fire created new heat management issues, despite the rotating barrel system that was supposed to solve thermal problems permanently. The engineering solutions involved materials science advances that pushed manufacturing technology beyond existing capabilities. Heat-resistant steels, improved barrel cooling fins, and thermal isolation between components all required metallurgical techniques that were still experimental. Each improvement increased manufacturing complexity and costs, while reducing the weapon's reliability advantage over simpler alternatives. Weight increases affected tactical mobility in ways that battlefield commanders hadn't anticipated. Lighter weapons could be repositioned quickly during combat, but heavily loaded drum-fed Gatling guns required crews and equipment that slowed tactical movement. Complexity increases meant that mechanical failures required specialized knowledge to diagnose and repair. Traditional weapons could be fixed by any competent soldier with basic tools. Advanced Gatling gun variants needed trained mechanics who understood timing mechanisms and extraction sequences. Gatling licensed manufacture to Colt, which produced later models and helped commercialize his patents. The business relationship provided manufacturing expertise that Gatling's workshop couldn't match, but it also moved control of the weapon away from its inventor toward companies focused on military contracts rather than humanitarian applications. By the 1880s, some models achieved over 400 rounds per minute, far beyond original specifications that Gatling had calculated based on humanitarian warfare assumptions. The rate of fire increases came from improved mechanical timing, better ammunition feed, and more efficient extraction systems. Each technical advance moved the weapon further from its original purpose toward pure lethality. The 400 round per minute capability represented a tenfold increase over traditional military weapons, but it also represented a fundamental shift in tactical thinking. Gatling's original humanitarian mathematics assumed that rapid-fire weapons would reduce overall casualties by shortening conflicts. Higher rates of fire instead enabled more thorough destruction of enemy formations, which prolonged rather than shortened engagements. Technical advances created the modern rapid-fire weapon, but moved further from Gatling's original humanitarian vision with each engineering improvement. The mechanical evolution followed engineering logic rather than humanitarian philosophy. Each modification improved performance without considering moral implications or strategic consequences. The rotating barrels, improved feed systems, and enhanced extraction mechanisms all worked exactly as designed. They solved technical problems efficiently and created weapons that exceeded original specifications in every measurable category. But technical success created moral failure as the humanitarian inventor's vision disappeared beneath layers of mechanical sophistication. The progression was clear. Jams led to improved feeds, which enabled electric drives, which evolved into modern rotary weapons. Each step solved immediate problems while creating new ones. The weapon that started as agricultural machinery adapted for humanitarian warfare had become a purely military technology optimized for maximum lethality. Each improvement made the gun more lethal, not more merciful, proving that engineering excellence and humanitarian objectives don't always align in weapons development. The mechanical evolution had succeeded completely, while the humanitarian mission had failed entirely. But Gatling himself remained convinced that his invention served its original purpose. Even as reports arrived describing the weapon's devastating effectiveness in colonial conflicts, even as military forces deployed it for territorial control rather than casualty reduction, the inventor maintained his belief in the humanitarian mathematics that had driven his original calculations. The man who had survived smallpox and dedicated his life to reducing human suffering watched his invention become synonymous with mechanized killing. Yet he continued working, continued inventing, continued believing that mechanical innovation could solve humanity's problems. The weapon had evolved beyond his control, but the inventor himself had other ideas brewing in his workshop. Gatling's workshop contained dozens of other projects that history largely forgot. While the world debated his gun, Gatling kept inventing everything from steam tractors to sanitation systems. His weapon was just one patent in a portfolio that spanned agriculture, medicine, and industrial machinery, like a Renaissance inventor trapped in the industrial age. Picture Gatling's workshop in the 1870s and 1880s. Blueprints scattered across workbenches, prototype machines in various stages of completion, the constant sound of metal being shaped and tested. The rotating gun mechanism that made him famous occupied just one corner of a facility buzzing with dozens of other projects. His seed planter revolutionized Midwest farming. The hemp breaker processed fiber crops more efficiently than manual methods. Steam plows and tractors could work fields faster than horse teams. He even held patents for toilet improvements that addressed sanitation problems in growing cities. Each invention addressed real human needs with the same systematic approach he'd applied to rapid-fire warfare. The smell of his workshop told the story of a mind that refused to focus on just one problem. Machine oil mixed with the metallic scent of fresh-cut steel, the acrid smell of coal smoke from steam engines under test, the earthy odor of soil samples he used to calibrate agricultural equipment. This wasn't the sterile environment of a weapons manufacturer, but the chaotic laboratory of someone who saw mechanical solutions everywhere. His agricultural inventions actually changed more lives than his famous gun ever did. Farmers across the Midwest used Gatling's seed drills and cultivators to transform subsistence farming into commercial agriculture. His mechanical innovations helped feed growing cities, supported westward expansion, and made American agriculture competitive on global markets. But nobody remembered the inventor of improved plowing equipment the way they remembered the creator of the Gatling gun. His diverse inventions couldn't escape the shadow of his most famous creation, no matter how practical or beneficial they proved to be. Newspaper articles about his latest agricultural patent inevitably mentioned his military weapon. Business partners introduced him as the inventor of the Gatling gun, not the creator of revolutionary farming equipment. The weapon had become his professional identity, whether he wanted that association or not. Think about the psychological burden of that kind of fame. Gatling had spent decades solving problems that improved human life. Better farming, more efficient manufacturing, cleaner sanitation systems. But his public identity remained tied to an instrument of death that had evolved far beyond his original humanitarian intentions. Every introduction reminded him of the moral complexity surrounding his most successful invention. He became president of the American Association of Inventors and Manufacturers in 1891, a position that recognized his contributions to American industrial development. The organization represented hundreds of inventors working on everything from household appliances to industrial machinery. Gatling used his leadership role to promote patent protection and encourage mechanical innovation across multiple industries. He genuinely believed that inventors had a moral responsibility to improve human conditions through better technology. His presidential addresses to the association revealed a man grappling with the dual nature of technological progress. Innovation could solve problems or create them, depending on how society chose to use new capabilities. He advocated for inventors to consider the social implications of their work, while acknowledging that creators couldn't control how their inventions would ultimately be deployed. Financial ups and downs from real estate investments and business ventures marked his later years like a roller coaster of boom and bust cycles. Patent royalties provided steady income, but Gatling invested heavily in speculative ventures that promised quick returns. Real estate developments, mining operations, and manufacturing partnerships all consumed capital that his inventions had generated. Some investments paid off handsomely, others collapsed completely. The financial volatility wasn't unusual for inventors of his era, but it created stress that affected his work and health. Picture the anxiety of having your financial security dependent on patent renewals, licensing agreements, and royalty payments that could disappear if competitors found ways around your innovations. Success as an inventor didn't guarantee financial stability as a businessman. Despite his wealth and recognition, Gatling continued to insist that his weapon aimed to reduce suffering, even as reports arrived from colonial battlefields around the world. Every newspaper account of Gatling guns used in imperial campaigns challenged his humanitarian mathematics, but he maintained that rapid-fire weapons would ultimately reduce casualties by making wars shorter and more decisive. The evidence from colonial conflicts suggested otherwise, but his conviction never wavered. His other inventions improved lives in practical ways that validated his belief in technology's power to solve human problems. Farmers produced more food with less labor. Manufacturers created products more efficiently. Transportation systems moved people and goods more reliably. These innovations represented the positive side of mechanical progress that Gatling had always championed, but none achieved the notoriety of the Gatling gun, which overshadowed everything else he accomplished during his career. Agricultural equipment doesn't generate headlines the way military weapons do. Sanitation systems don't capture public imagination like rapid-fire mechanisms. The boring, practical inventions that actually improved daily life remained invisible, while the spectacular weapon dominated his public identity. The tension between his humanitarian intentions and his weapon's reality never resolved. The inventor who wanted to reduce human suffering became known primarily for creating more efficient ways to cause it. His humanitarian impulses had produced mechanical innovations that solved real problems, but his most effective invention served purposes he'd never intended. Gatling died February 26, 1903, and was buried at Crown Hill Cemetery. He remained convinced his gun served humanitarian purposes despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. He continued to argue that mechanical innovation could solve the fundamental problems of human conflict, that better technology would eventually create better outcomes for everyone. The optimism never faded, even as reality contradicted his theories. The man was gone, but his mechanical principles would outlive every humanitarian intention he'd ever harbored. His rotating barrels had learned to spin without their creator's moral guidance, and they were just getting started. The technology outlived every intention its creator ever had. Turn on any modern military aircraft, and you'll hear Gatling's rotating barrels still spinning. The sound is unmistakable once you know what to listen for. That distinctive mechanical whir of multiple barrels rotating in sequence, the rapid-fire staccato that sounds like industrial machinery crossed with controlled thunder, the same mechanical where you'd hear from an A-10 or a helicopter minigun traces back to that Indianapolis workshop. Modern fighter jets carry weapons that trace their mechanical DNA directly back to Gatling's Civil War laboratory, where a doctor first figured out how to make barrels share the punishment of sustained fire. Gatling's rotating barrel concept directly inspired later electrically driven rotary cannons, such as the M61 Vulcan and the post-World War II miniguns. The multi-barrel, motor-driven idea resurfaced in the 20th century. The weapons have different names now, sleeker designations that sound more like computer codes than mechanical descriptions. But strip away the modern electronics and advanced materials, and you'll find the same rotating principle that Gatling developed while trying to save lives through superior lethality. 6 barrels spinning around a central axis, each one firing in sequence while the others cool, load, and prepare for their turn. Electric drives replaced hand cranks, but the core principle remained unchanged. Rotating barrels managing heat and ammunition flow through mechanical precision rather than human timing. Modern versions don't need soldiers cranking handles at perfect speeds while dodging enemy fire. Electric motors provide consistent rotation that maintains optimal firing rates regardless of combat conditions or operator stress levels. The engineering improvements are remarkable when you consider the technological gap between Gatling's era and modern warfare. His original weapon required gravity feed and paper cartridges that jammed in humid conditions. Current versions use electrically driven feed systems that can handle thousands of rounds without human intervention. The ammunition feeds through powered belts that eliminate the gravity dependence that plagued early models. But these modern weapons achieved rates of fire that would have horrified their inventor beyond recognition. Gatling's 1893 electric patent demonstrated thousands of rounds per minute in tests, and decades later comparable electric-driven systems became standard on aircraft. He calculated his humanitarian mathematics based on weapons that fired hundreds of rounds per minute. He envisioned rapid fire as a way to concentrate destructive power while reducing the total number of soldiers exposed to battlefield diseases and prolonged combat conditions. Modern versions obliterate those assumptions with rates of fire measured in thousands rather than hundreds of rounds per minute. The mechanical principle that Gatling thought would reduce casualties through efficiency instead enables destruction on scales that dwarf anything he witnessed during the Civil War. His rotating barrels now serve weapon systems that can deplete their entire ammunition supply in seconds rather than minutes. Think about what that kind of fire rate means in practical terms. A modern aircraft cannon can expend more ammunition in 30 seconds than Gatling's original weapon could fire in an hour of continuous operation. The thermal management that his rotating barrels provided now serves weapons that generate heat loads beyond anything 19th century metallurgy could have handled. The psychological impact alone would have shocked Gatling's humanitarian sensibilities. His original weapon created fear through sustained but controlled fire that gave enemy formations time to retreat or surrender. Modern rapid-fire weapons eliminate targets so quickly that psychological warfare becomes irrelevant. There's no time for the enemy to consider surrender when engagement duration measures in fractions of seconds. They're mounted on helicopters, fighter jets, and ground vehicles for maximum battlefield impact, rather than the fixed positions that characterized Gatling's era. Mobility transforms rapid-fire weapons from defensive tools into offensive systems that can engage multiple targets across vast areas. Helicopter gunships carry rotating barrel weapons that provide fire support while moving at high speeds across complex terrain. Fighter aircraft mount these weapons as secondary armament for close-range engagements where missiles aren't practical or cost-effective. The rotating barrels that once required horse-drawn carriages for battlefield mobility now travel at supersonic speeds while maintaining the same basic mechanical principles. Electric power systems provide the energy that human cranking once supplied. Ground vehicles integrate rapid-fire systems for area denial and defensive perimeters around strategic installations. Modern military bases use automated versions that can engage incoming threats without human operators, something Gatling never imagined when he was calculating the humanitarian benefits of reducing army sizes through concentrated firepower. The humanitarian inventor's mechanical legacy became the backbone of modern warfare in ways that completely inverted his original intentions. Every major military force operates weapons systems based on his rotating barrel principle. The mechanical innovation that was supposed to reduce human suffering instead multiplied the destructive capacity of modern armies by orders of magnitude. Naval vessels mount rapid-fire systems for point defense against incoming missiles and aircraft. These weapons can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining the thermal management advantages that rotating barrels provide. The same principle that helped Civil War soldiers avoid barrel overheating now protects aircraft carriers from supersonic anti-ship missiles. Each evolution moved further from casualty reduction toward overwhelming firepower that eliminated enemy resistance through superior technology rather than tactical superiority. Modern warfare doctrine emphasizes rapid engagement and target elimination rather than the prolonged battles that Gatling hoped to shorten through concentrated firepower. His humanitarian mathematics became irrelevant when engagement times measure in milliseconds. The irony cuts deeper when you consider that modern rapid-fire weapons achieve exactly what Gatling predicted. Small forces equipped with superior firepower can control vast territories while suffering minimal casualties. But the context shifted from humanitarian warfare to technological dominance that creates the same casualty imbalances that characterized colonial deployments of his original weapon. Military training now includes familiarization with weapon systems that would have seemed like science fiction to Gatling's generation. But the mechanical principles remain recognizable to anyone who understood his original design. Rotating barrels, sequential firing, thermal load distribution, and gravity-assisted ammunition feed all continue to define modern rapid-fire weapons. Electronic fire control systems manage timing that human operators once provided through hand cranking, but the fundamental engineering challenge remains identical: how to maintain sustained fire without destroying the weapon through thermal overload. Gatling's solution proved so effective that it became the foundation for weapons technology that will likely persist for decades to come. Gatling's rotating barrel principle proved more durable than his humanitarian philosophy could ever hope to be. The mechanical innovation survived every technological revolution since the industrial age, adapting to new materials, power systems, and tactical requirements while maintaining the core engineering insight that made rapid fire practical. The mechanism survived while the mercy got lost somewhere along the way. The doctor's mathematical equations had produced something far different from what he'd calculated in his workshop, and the final accounting was about to reveal just how wrong his humanitarian mathematics had been. The numbers tell a different story entirely. So here's the final irony. The doctor who wanted to heal the world helped create mechanized warfare instead. Gatling's humanitarian mathematics proved fatally flawed. More efficient killing didn't reduce casualties. It multiplied them across colonial battlefields and imperial campaigns. His rotating barrels that were supposed to prevent disease deaths by shrinking army sizes instead enabled technological dominance that created massive casualty imbalances. He meant mercy. History delivered a more complicated result. Gatling himself wrote in 1877 about his intent to enable one man to do the work of 100 and reduce exposure to disease. The U.S. Army officially adopted his gun in 1866 and declared it obsolete by around 1911. But the mechanical principle outlived every humanitarian intention. The gentle inventor who survived smallpox to help humanity instead gave warfare its mechanical edge. That edge is still cutting today in fighter jets and helicopter gunships, spinning at rates that would horrify the man who thought rapid fire meant mercy. Was he a humanitarian who miscalculated, or an engineer whose invention escaped his control? Tell me where you land in the comments. If this made you curious, like and subscribe, only if you actually enjoy the ride.